Are you a worst case scenario person? Do you always think the sky is falling? Whether it's your kids or your relationships, jobs, you expect the very worst and you're sure it will happen to you. That's catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is an excellent way to make yourself anxious, depressed, and completely ruin your life. I am Dr. B. In today's video, I'm going to help you recognize what is catastrophizing. And I'm going to give you some very simple steps for you to take yourself out of this devastating cycle. Catastrophizing happens when you think about, you search for, and you expect the worst possible outcomes. And this is when you run into just common everyday difficulties. And it can look like this. At school, if you or a child gets a disappointing grade on a test, you suddenly think, I will, or your child will fail, not graduate, not get into college, and never even get a good job. Or if you're at work and your manager or your boss isn't happy with how you performed on a presentation, then you might think, I'm going to be fired. I'm not going to be promoted. Or I might lose my job. Then I'm going to be unable to pay my rent. I'm going to have to move in with my family, or I might even be homeless. Or if you notice an unusual pain in your body, you might assume that it's a sign of a serious illness. For example, you suddenly get a headache, and now you think you probably have a brain tumor. Or you have stomach pain, and you think it's not from just eating something, but instead you think it's the sign of a ruptured appendix. And now you know you're going to have to go to the hospital. You're going to miss work, probably get fired. This is catastrophizing. Now you might say, I'm not catastrophizing. I'm just a really good planner. And I like to plan for the future to make sure nothing really bad happens and that I'm prepared. Well, you might think that's planning, but let's talk about the difference between catastrophizing and planning. If you're simply thinking of all the possibilities that you can prepare yourself for, then these extreme outcomes, these far out results and consequences would actually motivate you to study hard so you didn't get a bad grade the next time. Or you do more research or practice your presentation so that you'd be very smooth the next time you did it. And these additional efforts would give you more confidence and put you in a place of acceptance for the consequences that came for your actions. Because you know you did your best. And that's what happens for the person who is thinking about negative consequences. But that's not the case if you're catastrophizing. For the person who's catastrophizing, these negative consequences that you anticipate, they don't motivate you to change your consequences. And in fact, thinking about them makes you more anxious. You start to believe that they're going to happen, and there's nothing that you can do about it. And instead of working hard to prevent the terrible consequences, if you're catastrophizing, you prematurely give up. And you just assume that you're doomed to suffer like you always do. Life is not on your side, so why even bother? Instead of preparing for the possibilities, you prepare to give up. You run away. You see the outcome as being inevitable, and it's your predetermined destiny. You're helpless, and you're at the whim of the waves blowing you back and forth, back and forth. Now, another way to recognize if you're having catastrophic thinking, which is another way to say catastrophizing, is if you find yourself using absolute words. And these words are like always, every, never, only, and just. For example, I always get passed over for a promotion, or my boss dislikes just me, not anyone else. Or I'll never have a spouse that loves me because I'm always unlovable. This all or nothing rigid view of consequences becomes a reflex way of thinking. And it's exactly what catastrophizing looks like. It's what it sounds like. And inside, it's what it feels like. Maybe you do find yourself catastrophizing. Well, now what? How do you get out of this terrible, negative, repetitive cycle? Well, the good news is there are actually some easy steps to overcome catastrophizing. Now, when I say easy, they're easy to understand in principle, but they really do take some work and motivation to make them work. So I've kind of covered number one in the steps already, which is really to self-recognize that you're catastrophizing. Another way to say this is label it. So labeling and naming catastrophizing brings it out of your subconscious and brings it into your conscious awareness. So then you can actively address the things that you're having catastrophic thinking about. So number one, you just start noticing when you're catastrophizing. What are the words you use? Are they things like always, never, terrible, fail, rejected? Do you exaggerate? Do you make things out to be way worse? And do you think in absolutes? Well, you have to learn to observe yourself. And a really helpful approach is to engage a family member to point things out when they see you doing catastrophic thinking. Recognize this distorted thinking and you can address it. The second part is to pause. Just because you think something doesn't mean it's true. Learn to notice and then gently ask questions. Question your thoughts. Realize you don't have to believe everything that you think in your mind. This leads into step 2. Analyze. Make a fair assessment of how likely an outcome really is, and then start to formulate alternatives and probabilities. One of the most effective ways to do this is journaling. This can be a game changer because after you've journaled and written things down, you can then review what you wrote down and see what a big separation there is between your worst case scenario, your greatest fear, and then what really ended up happening. To journal, do the following. First, list what you're really worried about. What is the worst thing that could happen? Then decide how likely this scenario really is to occur. Use your own experience and use the experience of others to make a realistic assessment. And then look at how often does this really happen to yourself or others. For example, how many people are really fired in your workplace for screwing up on a presentation the first time? Or how many kids from other classes that got a C or a B in calculus or other people's kids really are now homeless or didn't make it into college or didn't graduate? And then look at what is most likely to happen, not what you fear is going to happen, but what is most likely. And then again, what can be really helpful? What would a friend or a family member that you really trust counsel you in this situation? What would they say they think would happen? Find someone that you really trust and who knows you. Now, keeping the journal and going back and looking at it can really help you learn that this worst case scenario and reality might be very different. And usually an alternative that's not so bad actually occurs. All right, then number 4. Number 4 is choose, right? So replace those catastrophic thoughts with something more honest and more helpful. Try and transition from the cycle of worst case scenario thoughts to real-time problem solving. Some of the ways that are helpful to do this are to think things like the following. When you might be thinking, oh, I screwed up on the presentation, I'm going to get fired, I'm going to lose my job and my apartment. Substitute it with a more active solution that might be more realistic, which is, I'm gonna go apologize to my boss. I know that everyone makes mistakes. I'm still learning. I'm gonna ask my boss for help and ask him or her for suggestions. Even if he or she does say something that's pretty bad to me, I can handle it and I can learn from it. See, you can replace your catastrophic thoughts with something that's a little bit more helpful. Here's another example. If you say something like, oh, I can't believe I said that to my girlfriend. She's gonna leave me for sure this time. Well, maybe. But let's replace that with different thoughts like, okay, I shouldn't have said that. I really need to learn how to talk kindly when I'm upset because I was a jerk. But again, I'm gonna apologize and I'm gonna try to make it right. Hopefully she'll understand and she'll accept my apology and we'll both learn something from this. So challenging catastrophic thinking or catastrophizing, this approach really requires us to stay engaged even though there's a risk of things not going perfectly. This makes somebody vulnerable and it's hard, but the potential is for significant and real success. And there's also potential for getting hurt, but the alternative is guaranteed failure by cutting yourself off before you even try. Now, finally, a really helpful approach to catastrophic thinking is mindfulness and meditation. If you find yourself in that cycle, don't concentrate on the past or the future. Learn to think about the here and the now, non-judgmentally. It can be as easy as concentrating on your breathing, in and out. Find a meditation app. online like Headspace or Calm. The simple act of learning to pay attention to your breathing and focus on the here and now and not looking to the imaginary future can be a game changer for you. Thanks for watching. Try these other videos on how to combat overthinking or these shorts on unusual disorders like alien hand syndrome. And please don't forget to hit subscribe.